Namo so shi Namo o Dhamma shi so o Namo manjo shi Namo so shi Namo o Dhamma shi so o Namo manjo shi Namo so shi Namo o Dhamma shi so Chư đăng tu kỳ tu nang lai, chang chu ma tu na ni kiao tu chi, dang ki chun yin ki pe chong nang ki, tu la ben che sang ki tu pa shu. Chư đăng tu kỳ tu nang lai, chang chu ma tu na ni kiao tu chi, dang ki chun yin ki pe chong nang ki, tu la ben che sang ki tu pa shu. Chư đăng tu kỳ tu nang lai, chang chu ma tu na ni kiao tu chi, dang ki chun yin ki pe chong nang ki, tu la ben che sang ki tu pa shu. Về cái chủ sĩ mê đồ trang, khi ra linh chi nhị đề kiến bà tì, sang khi xin đồ mê đề vô yê rô kê nà ta xin la chư bà shô, y đàn cô rô rã nà mên ta la kán kê yā ta yā.
Really want that they were good among the coach by him, no one at the eager digital. Didn't mind that they were the you. They were simple in a channel. And the church, and the body, the direction of Mama and she did on the song. The Virginia. No brains.
Please adjust your sitting posture according to 7 meditative postures of Vairocana. And think, all sentient beings have been my mothers. No sentient beings have been my mothers, not just once, but for numberless times. All sentient beings are as kind as my mothers in this life. Even though all kind-mother sentient beings want happiness and do not want suffering, however, due to engaging wrongly in objects of adoption and abandonment, they only experience suffering. They do not experience even a moment of happiness. In our mind, sincerely generate loving kindness towards all kind-mother sentient beings, thinking, how nice it would be if all kind-mother sentient beings were to have happiness and the causes of happiness, that is virtue. May all kind-mother sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. I will cause all kind-mother sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
At the age of the ordinary, really wonder. We have a board, you never have some region until before Tara and Philip. So, Chitu Tawa Tagajan to the Shin, Mama and Shin, and so on.
Next, we generate compassion towards all suffering mother sentient beings, thinking, how nice it would be if all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes in accordance with accomplishing virtue, such as physical pain, sickness, and problem caused by all elements. May all suffering mother sentient beings be free from suffering, be free from all classes. May the bodies of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. I will free the bodies of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
What is the what like you just want to job to it and not to parameter. All that kind of channel. You go about the job that you have about changing this.
How nice it would be if the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes, discordant with a conflicting virtue, such as mental suffering, fear, and all negative discursive thoughts, subtle and coarse. May the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes, discordant with accomplishing virtue. I will free the minds of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes, discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
What is the what like to give the maintenance? You have to do some matching what you go out of to the shin
How nice it would be if the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes, accordant with accomplishing virtue. Coarse, negative, coarse, and subtle negative speech, such as telling lies. May the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes, accordant with accomplishing virtue. I will free the speech of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes, accordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
What is the what like to give the maintenance of rules to be short for to be controlled and general. So you go out of the show to the shin
How nice it would be if the three lords of all suffering mother sentient beings were free from all classes, discordant with accomplishing virtue. May the three lords of all suffering mother sentient beings be free from all classes, accordant with accomplishing virtue. I will free the three lords of all suffering mother sentient beings from all classes, discordant with accomplishing virtue. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
What is the what like to get up? The way that the way you jump, give what I'm trying to. So you go out of the show to the come on the shin so please do what you
How nice it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering, that is non-virtue. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. I will free all sentient beings from suffering and the causes of suffering. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
What is the one like to get up? Quarter years, all doing question of where on a budget, I didn't get some young somebody from one. Whether you go sooner, you have about something like that. Something you can buy, you feel it, talk about how this is never going to change the same ways.
Next, we generate bodhicitta. First, we ask ourselves, who should take on the responsibility to free all other sentient beings from the sufferings of samsara and of lower realms? I should take on the responsibility to free all other sentient beings from the suffering of samsara and of lower realms. Even though I should take on the responsibility, I do not have the abilities to do so now. Who has the abilities? Those who have achieved perfectly complete enlightenment have the abilities to do so. Therefore, for the sake of all mother sentient beings, by all means, I will achieve the precious state of enlightenment. Next, we generate all-encompassing yoga mind. The aspiring conventional bodhicitta that thinks, for the sake of all mother sentient beings, by all means I will achieve the state of enlightenment. These transform into a perfect mundis at one's heart. And the ultimate bodhicitta, that is one's mind becoming one taste with emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, that transform into a white five-pronged vajra on top of the mundis. Next, we meditate on emptiness for a short while. That I exist neither intrinsically one with nor intrinsically different from the aggregates. Thus, I am empty of intrinsic existence. As I say, it is important and beneficial to conjoin whatever roots of virtue that we perform through our 3 doors with the practice of 6 perfections. Thus, to conjoin these roots of virtue of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma with the practice of 6 perfections. Thus, the first practice is generosity. The nature of generosity is an intention of giving. These 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma is for the sake of purifying the suffering and achieving the happiness of sentient beings. Next is morality. The nature of morality is a mind of abandonment. During these 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma, I will properly abandon my physical and verbal negativities so that they do not manifest in these 2 hours. Next is patience. The nature of patience is an undisturbed mind. During these 2 hours of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma, I will patiently accepting any physical or mental hardships that occur. Next is joyous effort. The nature of joyous effort is a mind that delights in virtue. I will delightfully put effort in listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma. Next is meditative concentration. Meditative concentration is a mind that single-pointedly focuses on any virtuous object. I will single-pointedly focus my mind on listening to, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma. And I will not let myself be influenced by distractions and discursive thoughts. The last one is wisdom. Wisdom is an awareness that thoroughly distinguishes phenomena. I will properly and correctly understand the words and meanings of the teachings that I listen to, contemplate, and meditate on. Set a good motivation. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I will achieve the state of enlightenment. For this purpose, I will listen to the holy teachings and practice accordingly in order to benefit sentient beings.
Thank you. 고마 만나 지금서 거기 두고 년에 집가 고마 삼을 땅사나 대지를 때 우리 안에 되고 우리 안에 거기 그냥 베이스인 거. 이제부터 뒤에서 뭐 또 많이는 거기 년에 생각해요 뭐로.
So whatever that we do at the beginning of a class, like setting a good motivations, and then to conjoin whatever roots of virtue, especially in this context, is the roots of virtue of listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Dharma with the practice of 6 perfections. And it is important to do so, and it is beneficial to do so as well. So if we think properly at the beginning of the class, also to conjoin whatever roots of virtue that we are going to do with the practice of 6 perfections, if we have these in our mind, have these motivations, have this intention with our mind, then whatever roots of virtue that we do, it will be infused with the practice of 6 perfections. So if we do not think, if we do not have, we do not think anything about the practice of 6 perfections, for example, before we engage in actions, then the actions will not be infused with the practice of 6 perfections.
나들이 가서 뭐 편지다 같은 거야 이거. 아니 뭐 편지 시바나 서칭하다 되는 있어. 아니 뭐 한두 번 시바나 비밀에서 나간다. 신이 이와 다케바 유진데스 유진데 다음에 상황들을 시바. 뭐 신이 이와 다케 유진데 유진 다음에 생각시 이거디디 다를 가서 있어.
So I'll go straight to Prasangika Madhyamaka. So the Prasangika system is explained according to 7 divisions as before. So the 7 divisions are definition, examples, etymology, modes of asserting objects, modes of asserting object possessors, and modes of asserting selflessness, and presentations of grounds and parts.
나도 뭐 신이들랑 가서 돼 이제 가도 generaji kanji tsangi yaki yebi gode dengi tanya diya mudi umaba kanji sinsin marwa dengi wazo katu wazo mudi gode ni debi wa.
So Lama Jizimba asserted the definitions of Prasangika is, the definitions of a Prasangika is a Madhyamika who, by means of asserting merely other approved consequences, does not assert true existence, even nominally.
어디 단주세와도 지나서 그래서 고가분을 이용해와 이제 일단 뭐든지 이 안에 고 대부 시간이 된다. 단주에서 뭐 단주에서 가르치 주거나 랑기 친이기 두바 하늘 장도야 뭔가 미리 오마 무슨라고 딱 배우는 거래. 와 랑기 친이기 두바 랑기 친이기 두바 하늘 장도야 미리 딱 오마가 오마비 그러다 지라 오마바들라 단주에서 되고 와 어디라나 this 거기에 지나가서 단이 못하고 뒤에서 말하는 거 와 this 단주를 갖다 this 거기에 본다고 어디 그래서 그런 게 진행이 좀 매장돼야 딱 이게 단주 와서 그런 거 그랬어 그런 게 진행 좀 평균적이야 뭐 이게 봐봐 지나 딱 단주와 맞는 거 같은 거서 엄마 받이나 단주와는.
So when we talk about Prasangika, and as you can see in the text, it says consequence middle way school, right? So they also call them as consequentially. So when we talk about Prasangika or consequence school, then this is the definitions asserted by Lama Jizumba. So another definitions of the Prasangika, which is shorter and easier to understand, is a Madhyamika who does not assert the establishment by way of its own character, even conventionally. I repeat. The definitions of a Prasangika is a Madhyamika who does not assert the establishment by way of its own character, even conventionally. A Prasangika who does not assert the establishment by way of its own character, even conventionally. So when we say like this, a Prasangika who does not assert the establishment by way of its own character, even conventionally, then straight away, one would think about Prasangika Madhyamika. So you will not think that this could be the assertions of Svatandika Madhyamika. So because this is not the definition for Svatandika Madhyamika. When you say this, then one will straight away think it as the definitions of a Prasangika.
that is another. That's tangible. That's another form of worship. That kind of tangible that tangible that
So as in the definitions of a Prasangika, it says is a Madhyamika who, by means of asserting merely other approved consequences, does not assert true existence even nominally, right? So what does it mean is, like for example, if there is a person who asserts sound as permanent, so there is another person who asserts sound as permanent. So then you have to give reasons, so consequences, or you have to give him reason to prove that sound is not permanent. So since he asserts that sound is permanent, right? So if it is permanent, then it is necessarily non-product, not product. So then you can use this to say to the person. So sound is not a product, right? Because it is permanent. So then by saying these consequences, because the person say that sound is permanent, right? So in response to in order to establish the objects to be proven, which is sound is in fact not permanent, then instead of saying directly to the person, then you say you say to him like this. So sound is not a product, right? Because it is permanent. So if you say this to the person, then not to make the person to think about his own stand or assertions.
that Nani tanga mehifi.
Ngoni me ba.
Ngoni me ba mawasi na de. Ngoni me ba mawasi na de ro. But that tanju was in the bubu sa ta de. De uma ba de la ta tanju ma da ha ji ma. No, ta ran chi che tanga ran chi du ba ke ni ro. O de.
So to think about the definitions, so other than the definitions of a prasangika listed in the text, then to say the definitions which is shorter and easier to remember is a prasangika who does not assert the establishment by way of his own character, even conventionally. So if you say this, then you can understand the definitions of a prasangika in this way, which is shorter and easier to remember. So this is the definitions of the Prasangika Madhyamika, or you can say that this is the definitions of opponents of non-entityness. Opponents of non-entityness. So you can say it's the definitions of a Prasangika, or the definitions of opponent of non-entityness. And these definitions is not applied on Svatantika Madhyamika, because Svatantika Madhyamika do assert establishment by way of its own character.
Oh, digital tanju wa tsini digital yewa da nga zo ingwa da hope sanji da wa da ba shwa la da ba ta yewa da da ge ta ba ro wa yewa be sanji da wa da ba shwa la da.
So examples or divisions. So Buddha Palita, Andhrakiti, and Shantideva are examples of Prasangika Madhyamikas.
Da su ganda da hope sanji ja da wa da ba shwa la da ba sin go da ida mo bu yo ro wa mo bu yo nga zo anda dire sanji ja so de hola so de su ganda nga zo uma balbe na shin da wa ni le ba su na ni da wa cha cha wa ina ba ba kan jo ba sa de ro wa na ta mo ngo lu du da 아발라 니가게 간다 간다 동치미 엄마 봤을 때 아볼레네 엄마 당보디 나 고속이 배 소리는 소다 바니리
그러니까 수익 당보디
뭐 정말 엄마 당보파 간다 그게 싫어와 뭐 레네다 시스레네 스타마 되버스로와 나 당보 엄마 간다 공부를 아발라 공부를 아발라 속에 엄마 힘들我写我们别看到，木子嘛别，他是嘛修的，那我们做了的那个你就说个放，你这个南极把贴过来，跟谈就啊贴过来，这南极把贴电视贴过来，这谈就多呢，贴过来是呢，这个吃了个七八三万，现在这里是不用买的是不是？我们路的跑跑了的，是吧？我们路的跑跑了的，这个对，看간료하기 때 이게 환자 간료하기 때 체벌이 무관들 만지고 그러면서 미쳐다 시면 많이 되지 와 미치려면 미 제가 싸워 체험 말해서
미리 댄스된 또
어디 되지 어디 되지 대고 말해서 먼저 대고리에서 먼저 대고리에서 미리 제가 싸워 이제 막 시면 말해서 엄마 진짜하네 개월에 진짜로 시험을 딱 따와도 엄마 그러지 마 제우로 와 맞다게 따와도 시험 때 지금도 막 시험 있어가지 마도 라비 인식에 내가 한주로 그거에서는 우리 제가 싸워지는 지금 말이야 다 봐봐라
디 nga bo le ngin di ro nga ti di nga wa le ngin di
nga le onda padura do ba onda tawa ke ma ko ke ro ka ba
So when we talk about Madhyamika, so Madhyamika they are can be divided into two. So those who earlier ones and the later ones. So talking about those Madhyamika, how's it there? Those are earlier Madhyamika and later Madhyamika. So Protector Nagarjuna and Ayadeva, so they are earlier Madhyamika, so who compose texts to restore the Madhyamika system, and also to give commentary on to explain the intention, Buddha's intention. So in their commentarial text, they do not specifically say that this is tenable with autonomous reason, and then this is tenable for consequential consequences, and then this is tenable in this Svadantika Madhyamaka text, and then this is not tenable in Prasangika Madhyamaka text, for example. So there are no words that specifically or clearly distinguish in this way. 상기 경랑 예, 민대한 상기 경로.
상지자로. 상지자가 간다. 공부를 탄지 이거 왔다. 탄지 공부를 포만 상지자가 따라서 따라서. 상지자로. 상지자가 공부도 막 사실 공부도 공부 탄지 뭐 내가 막 못하고 있어. 어떻게 그랬어? 예, 나와 잡아게 되가로. 시험을 때 나와 잡아다 흉체를 시험. 탄지와서 한지비 체바 체험을 시험.
시선 나올라.
뭐배 시선으로 시험으로. 어때? 레딩이나 나랑 지기스 캠을 탄지 캠 맞는 체바 쇼시야.
양기기 된지 티를.
티를. 캠 맞는 레딩이가 계속 되면은 계속 되면서 이게 좀 많이 시험을 되네. 도시네. 시스템이 좀 답답해. 그래서 그 지금 시험 한다.
So during later times, those later masters such as Buddha Chandrakirti, and also Bhava Viveka, then they give a commentary based on they give commentaries on the root text called Fundamental Wisdom, composed by Nagarjuna. So when they give commentaries on or explain the intentions in the root text called Fundamental Wisdom, composed by Nagarjuna, then Buddha Palita also composed a commentary text called Buddha Palita, and same name. And also Chandrakirti, then he also composed a commentary called Clear Words. So especially in this commentary, Clear Words, then Chandrakirti he extensively distinguishes Svadantika Madhyamaka and Prasangika Madhyamaka. And then Bhava Viveka in his the light of wisdom in his commentary text, they call the light of wisdom, or the lamp of wisdom. Then Bhava Viveka also explain whether is tenable with using the autonomous reason, and it is not tenable using the autonomous reason, and etc.
that is 간다 탄주와 있는 다른 세샤지 미지 바시 바시 그것도 도도시면 탄주와 속에 세샤지 미지 바시 탄주와시 그런 세샤지 인기지 바디 로지 바시
랑제나 시에미
랑제 그거 좋아 세샤지 미지 바디 탄주 그런 세샤지 인기지 바디 로지 바시 와 이니 제가 되는 간다 또 라지 탄주와서 또 제가 되시
So basically, in earlier times, Svadantika Madhyamaka and Prasangika Madhyamaka is not clearly distinguished during in earlier times, during Nagarjuna and Ayadevas. So in later times, then Buddha Palitas, Chandrakirtis, Bhava Viveka, then they talk about the differences between Svadantika Madhyamaka and Prasangika Madhyamaka. So basically, in short, to understand the difference between Svadantika Madhyamaka and Prasangika Prasangika Madhyamika is Madhyamika who who does not assert establishment by way of his own character. And Svadhandika Madhyamika is a Madhyamika who asserts the establishment by way of his own character. So this is the difference between Svadhandika Madhyamika and Prasangika Madhyamika. Prasangika Madhyamika do not assert the establishment by way of his own character, whereas Svadhandika Madhyamika do assert the establishment by way of his own character. So Prasangika Madhyamikas, those are Madhyamikas who does not assert establishment by way of his own character, right? And the sutra that they refer to, the sutra that they refer to are sutra of definitive meanings. Are those sutras of definitive meanings? So basically, sutras of definitive meaning are those sutra that explicitly indicates the ultimate truth. So are those sutras that explicitly indicates or teaches the ultimate truth. So in terms of sutra, the examples are the extensive, middling, and condensed Madhyamaka Sutra or Heart Sutra. In terms of treatises, then the text that they refer to, the treatise that they refer to, such as the six collections of reasoning, composed by Nagarjuna, and also Compendium of Sutra, also composed by Nagarjuna, and 400 verses composed by Ayadeva, and Bodhicavatara, which is engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds, and also the Compendium of Training composed by Shantideva, and also auto commentary of Entering the Middle Way, composed by Chandrakirtis. So those are the treatises, those are the treatises and sutra they refer to. Dangi di yuki di du sum dang shan ning bo. Oh, da.
또 거기서 또 나오는데 다 랑가시킨 도스. 랑가시킨 도. 이게 그렇게 봤어요. 이게 또 보기도요.
Yeah.
이게 또 보기.
Bien tuvo.
이게 또 보기. 이게 또 보기마다 또 분지 여봤더니 또 노트 먹을 다 분지 여봤더니 또
Kuchingimdo.
이제 또 보기면 도서 다 데라 소바 같이 열다 와. 다 chanzoning people 하나 더 가지 요. 어디 소리에서 뭐다 하다. 진짜 또
Yeah, so those Madhyamikas who assert the establishment by way of his own character, which is Svadantika Madhyamika. So Svadantika Madhyamika, the source or the text the source or the text or sutra they refer to, for example, descend into Lanka Sutra, and also the dense array of ornaments sutra.
어디 데라서 뭐다 디디지 티지를 가지고 그거를 쓰자고 와. 그거도 숨바 대시만이다. 아마 좀 그러면. 근데 대시데 간다 숨바 대시데 다 호배 산지에 쳐로 뭐 판지가 기기를 이제 판지단이 쉬고 지라 그게도 개파치와 이게 제가 저 했어요. 판지단이 간다. 맞아. 뭐 치고 대기가 두개도 되봐. 두자. 내가 두개야 되와. 그러면 다 봐주면 내 멤버 두바이나다. 근데 두고와 Dember member to the Duja, Dember member to the Anada, Ramataba to the Anada, and the Duja Kanato related, get of the Kipper, yes, that is it.
You said the Apena session at the Pombo Temba Matuba.
What did he? Well, that is it. The Kaki was to get a quiet Java chip. Yes, if you have been it. 같이 그 이야기 이렇게 다 가다 린디 배치는 다 단지 왔어요. 이거です.
Etymology. There is a reason why Acharya Buddha Palita is called Prasangika. It is because he asserts that an inference realizing a thesis is generated in the continuum of an opponent merely by stating a consequence. So it is because he asserts that an inference realizing a thesis is generated in the continuum of an opponent merely by stating a consequence, right? So, for example, if an opponent asserts sound as permanent or asserts aggregates as truly existence, so in order to generate an inference realizing a thesis, so a thesis or object to be proven is, for example, the aggregate is not truly existent, and the sound is impermanent. So those are thesis or object to be proven. So in order to generate such inference realizing realizing such thesis, so the way to generate it is by merely stating a consequence.
Uma tani wa hindi sonje sewa de dawata dile sandi keba kadi sandi jare se ne ni yore wa padi dawata de ma gs ki chonda timba padi dawata ba isyo
Padi dawata
tani wa hindi sonje da tani wa hindi sonje de dawata ba yes wa obe sandi jare tani hindi sonje ma res tani hindi sonje ma re tani wa hindi sonje ge de res na jore hindi sonje wa dige sonje yes hindi sonje ma res 아무래도 GPS 기 쇼나 뭐이나 더더더 이거 그래서 이거 좋아
Yeah, so in some texts, when we talk about the founders or pioneers or heretiers of Prasangika Madhyamika, the systems of Prasangika Madhyamikas, some texts they say is Buddha Palita. So, however, which is the one who is more common is Chandrakirti. So Chandrakirti is commonly accepted to be the pioneer or charioteer or founder of the system of Prasangika Madhyamika. And however, when we talk about Buddha Palita, then you can say that Buddha Palita is the holders of the system Prasangika Madhyamika systems. So there is a difference. One is founder or charioteers or pioneer. Another one is the upholders of the system. So Chandrakirti is the pioneer of a Prasangika Madhyamaka system, and Buddha Palita can be said as the upholder of Prasangika Madhyamaka system.
나 선지자한테 배나 엄마 탄디 힌디 선들에 에서는 가르스나 탄디 힌디 선들에 가르스나 본부를 공부 사시지 공부 뭐에 사시지 공부에 탄디 공부는 막 뭐 땅이 선지자는 예스
Kamu tangi.
공부 고마 땅이 본부라 선지자가 공부를 두게 나 선지자로 와서 사시지 공부 사시지 공부 토마 땅에 선지자가 예스
Nambo Tengyui
뭐 kanji kumba 뭐 땅이 kanji kumba 뭐 kumba 땅이 선지장 예. 이 선지장 인바 송사 선지장데 kanji kumba 선지에서 그도 힘이 버려. 그도 힘이 너무 좋아.
So some say that Buddha Palita is the founder or pioneer or charities of Prasangika Madhyamaka systems, right? So the reason they mention is the reason that mentions in the text is because Buddha Palita is the first one who comments on the yang Tengyue Lula ni di what di yore. What doing it? Tengyue Lula.
kumba kanji 뭐 kumba kanji 그거 kumba kanji yes 선지장이
Because Buddha Palita was the first one who imposed commentaries on the fundamental wisdom called wisdom according to Prasangika Madhyamaka system.
나들 파트지 가르치고서 나서 내가 드시고 그래. 한국이 뭐 공부해서 초반 단계에 선지자를 위해서 하는 예전에 힘이 손지 자고 말해서 예전에 힘이 손지 자고 말해. 힘이 손지 서와대 뭔가 잡아 마치 네. 이 태운도 조금 못 있으면 근데 이거 주술제. 와. 근데 뭔가 맞다오데 제일이다. 아직 ጤ지 잡고 되게 있고. 한국에서 이제 그래서 어때봐 뭔가 지시체. 뭔가 지시를 제가 해서 뭔가 지시. 또 힘이 손지에서 이게 강지라. 나서 벌써 랑가데 뭐 선에데 어때 잡아이나 선지장도 그래서 무슨 아무래도 난가도 서열했으나 서열할 때 난가디가 뭐다 너 두고선 좀 두려 안돼 난가 뭐다 많다 난가 서열했어 와 서열했어 그래 어디 간 거야 난가 서열 도마 서열 선지장 서열했어 서열에 뭐다 그래서 서열은 미소야 그랬어 뭐다 그래서 서열에 야이네 신도 파고 갑자기 파지 나 제목 그래서 간다 파지 야 전부세 뭐 됐어요 뭐 됐을 수 있어서 나와지 보세요 단지 힘이 속에서 뭐가 야 전부 속에 여러분이 그런 말에 한국의 태국에서 우리 주세 지시 전에 봐 표고 챙기는 다 나와봐 무슨 나와
Yeah, so even though Buddha Palita was the first one who composed a commentary who give commentaries on the intentions of the Tengyue Gompa Jing and Sangigang. Yeah, so even though Buddha Palita was the first one who explained so even though Buddha Palita was the first one who first explained the intention or the intended meaning in the fundamental wisdom called wisdom, however, that is not enough. So even though Buddha Palita was the first one, that itself is not enough. So in order to be called a founder or pioneer or charities, then the person must be the one who gave extensive explanations to illustrate the intended meaning. Like for example, the autonomous reason is not tenable, and then by merely stating a consequence, then it is tenable, for example. So basically, what we can understand, the example is like this: if a person who go to a so go to a snow mountain, so Buddha Palita was the first one who hiked the snow mountain, but was Buddha Palita the first one who hiked the mountain? Yes, he was the first one. However, Buddha Palita did not make the hut bigger or wider so that the car can go through. So Buddha Palita didn't do that. The one who widened the roads and then cut the trees and move the rocks behind the roads and make it bigger, make the road bigger and wider was Chandrakirti.
다들 단조기 시기 손질한 것도 나와다가 인스타 란디블까지 미팅이 되게 기사로와 왜 아니 쉬면 뭐지로와 란디블까지 미팅이 되게 기사로와
Yeah, so and the founder of Svatantika Madhyamaka was Bhava Viveka. So this I have explained already, so I will not go through it again.
오늘 또 시바 유신 됐습니다. 다만 이제 그래요. 시바 유신 됐다. 얘들아 고지의 의미니 기분도 고지의 따라되는 도기비 여기서 고지 서도나니 따라만 되게 요 고지의 여기서 원지도 하겠어. 와.
So modes of asserting objects, there are two kinds of objects, hidden and manifest. Prasangikas assert that objects that must be realized by depending on a sign are hidden, and objects that can be ascertained by ordinary beings through the strength of experience without depending on a sign are manifest.
다들 당분만 생시려는 가서 다 뭔지도 고지도 뭔지 시오디 다 이제 따라되는 또 이런 고지세 다 가서 따라도기를 다 준세나한테 간다 로고래 다 생시자오데 라메가 야 대동 사기 다음에 다들 저서만 사기 다음에 와 저서만 간다 수도 지오라 봐 민지라 상황다 준세지게네 민지라 상황다 그래마도 와서 관시에서 무슨 미식이 뭐야 그때 이제라 되는 미식 속에 나서 또 말해서 와 그거 저기 와서 또 우리 나 대도다 다음에 다 사기 다음에서 또 또야라 당부 준세 안 보기를 와서대 나도 해봐야겠어 이제 가는 아 된데에서 와더니 이제 이거와 스페셜리 그래마도 이제 마시나 또 말해서 शेबा वांशी तो तुमने ऐसे हो तो तो वो तो ऐसा तो ऐसे तो पहुंच से वो रहा
大才得电机呗，
大是经济的
经济人呢，人变得是啥？人弄那点电机变得是啥？
那个电把要嘛，我们这个嘛，经济人呢，电机啊是，对了对，那经济电机是我为了生活当的，那个电把那个哦，经济对了对。
So regarding the hidden objects, are objects that must be realized by depending on a sign, right? So for example, the object to be realized, for example, the impermanence of a sound or the sounds emptiness of true existence or the selflessness of person. So in order to realize this, in order to realize this, then we must depend on a sign. So sign, another word for this is reason. So, for example, sound is empty of true existence because it is dependent arising. So, dependent arising is the sign, is the reason. So by thinking about the sign and reason, then one can realize. Only then one can realize the sound's emptiness of true existence. So, and it is hidden objects are those objects that cannot be realized. That cannot be immediately realized by a sense consciousness. 미시에게 남성한테 또투 남성 또투 말이야. 나한테 미 광시에 또투 말. Yeah. So hidden objects are those objects that cannot be realized by sense consciousness at all.
완전 미식이 수도바나 심에 도도바나 미도도 해서 그 뭐 되게 생각 때문에 또 우리가 취업 받으지내다 정말 보지.
So hidden objects are not those objects that can be realized by sense consciousness, for example, in eye consciousness. So it is not as obvious or manifest like eye consciousness seeing flowers. So those hidden objects cannot be realized by sense consciousnesses.
他曾经找过那个这样的吧，你非常的这地都是想的吧，当时给他们中国电吧没吧，都是他们的家穷是吧？中国电没，当时给他们我这点东西是这样的吧？那这是他们的看的，但是因为嘛是过的，人生都生活多过来嘛都，那可能嘛是每天都要给嘛。
So illustrations of the first are the impermanence of sound and sound's emptiness of true existence, and also aggregates emptiness of true existence or the selflessness of person. So those are the illustrations of the first one, which is hidden. Those are hidden objects that can only be realized by depending on a sign. And illustrations of the second are those manifest objects, such as a box, a woolen cloth, flowers, etc.
而且你把这个，他程度呢就到了没地方，他程度非常是丢了我的话，那就到了没地方，我都经给你比如说我这种，我是我就是说这个经历这个，我这个人说，这个人说当时就估计这么写下来哇，那程度呢就看到，我这个人说，我就到了没地方，到了没地方，我都经给你比如说，但我就也是哇。
Because I'm going to tang ngân yu de sung de tuan ji is de sung yu lai. Ngân sung tang ngân yu tuan ji tang yu de la kun zo de ba tang de na de ma yi yu.
省钱的这个是吧？哦，这种是吧？不过这个，到了店里多给别人，我给当上去。很多人就到了没地方用，我就给你别人们用这个。然后钱你把钱的话，那钱
没错。有钱一点了。
那就给你对。So,
and objects that can be ascertained by ordinary beings through the strength of experience without depending on the sign are manifest. So basically, these can be the definitions of manifest.
那这个就是说，看到我就是说的，看到这个，我就是说的别个说别连他不学过的，谁知道我小娃呢？看到我就是说的。今年我说的，我觉得，我我没有，我都买这个去，我就买一个去了哇，这是什么的？刚才我觉得，是吧？我说的，我觉得，我没有是吧？我没有，我不是这个是吧？有，我都买这个去，这是什么的？就没给拿的。
对，就没给拿的。
对，就没给拿的。
Yeah, so illustrations of the second are a pot and a woolen cloth, directly perceivable objects and manifest objects, and objects of a sense power, and non-hidden phenomena are mutually inclusive. So repeat, directly perceivable objects and manifest objects, and objects of a sense power, and non-hidden phenomena are mutually inclusive.
我觉得等级比那个全部解释的。我觉得我是满意的确实，我觉得我是满意的确的。
我当元素，
我觉得我是满意的确，我是满意的解法给写下去，等级比那个谈的，我这个等级比那个就等级他们写解怎么解释？对吧？我觉得我是满意的确，
我是满意的确
啊，解法给写下，解法给写是等级比那个谈的。
解法给写下呀，
解法写下，
yeah, they go through wrong. So just now I forgot to mention hidden object. So hidden object and non-directly perceivable object and object of comprehension of inferential cognizer are mutually inclusive. So I repeat, hidden object, non-directly perceivable object, and objects of comprehension of inferential cognizer are mutually inclusive.
那你这个情绪的心理差的对吧？那你这个情绪的话，就被这种对吧？你这个情绪的，你当中，或者能不得我是别人听对吧？你考虑了，这张情绪嘛的，但是我想讲，书，是吧？说，什么的那个，是吧？那个，但是这个就好了，你进了定了。那就进了嘛，地方多多了，红包喜欢的，南北喜欢的，路是吧？ 너 이게 원심만 있으러 너 참아도 가서 그러나 유대나 때문에 뭐 그런 뭐지 그런 거 봐. 유대나 때문에 누가 또그 생각 간다. 그런 거 봐. 뭐 있으면 잘 진짜.
So illustrations of the second are a pot and a woolen cloth. So not only that, so basically you can you can say perceive the examples such as form, sound, smell, taste, object of touch. So those are illustrations of the second. So basically these illustrations can be realized or cognized without depending on a sign or reason. So like for example, pot is something that you can see directly with your eyes. So those are manifest objects.
dentro da. No ya anja yola yola ta yola ta ko di dang ni shi ya yola. Ko da da di mas ni shi wa. Ko de ma de da de ma di. Yo di da ta mo. Ani chi chimine de ko ani chi chima ro ni tan chi chima ko ro ni ko de ma ni chi. Ko de ma de shi ko ni chima.
So another way of dividing objects is into conventional truths and ultimate truths. So the definitions of something being a conventional truth is an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing a conventionality, and with respect to which a valid cognizer distinguishing a conventionality becomes a valid cognizer distinguishing a conventionality. The distinguishing can also be translated as analyzing.
Quando appunto devo essere sono due also io te la canta appunto devo che la devo slow di ma poni mai che tu cani che sama quello
Only my
ma poni mai ba 뭔가 니 많이 비추 cani che sama de quello va quello de 어 quello devo essere 왔다 아니 지 sama se 이게 시발에 아 된다 devo essere 정말 돈이 로고 와 그때 봐 돈이 로고 와 io 강가를 되는 빌로 여기 군도 되면 여기 된다 되면 이거 많이 취지 요 말. 이제 어디 보시나 돈이 많이 비춰 간 같은 거 되면 됐어. 어디에
So basically, if it is an object, it can be categorized as either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. So ultimate truth basically refers to emptiness. So and to understand conventional truths, and very easy to understand is as long as all phenomena that are not emptiness are conventional truth. So because we say that ultimate truth is emptiness, right? So all phenomena that are not emptiness are conventional truth.
어디 어디 빌어보다 다 간다 군도 됨바세 와들라 군도 됨발라 양다 군도도 군도 디시 제리가 말해서 엠리 양다 군도 비비시데 군도에 양다만 되는 로바에 그래서 어디로도 다 같이 런지 발라 가서 양다 군도 디시에로 와 이겼어요 다 단조는 멜로 단조는 양다 군도 무슨 요 말해서 이 치가 시야요 됐어 와 양다 군도 요 말해서 군도에 양다 많이 그래 되는 거에 해서 그런가
It is not appropriate to divide conventional truths into two, real conventionalities and unreal conventionalities, because there are no real conventionalities. So this is because if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily not real. This is because if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily unreal. In Svatantika Prasangika system, they assert two conventional truths, the real conventionalities and unreal conventionalities. However, in Prasangika system, conventional truth is not divided into two.
다 군도 되발라 양다 많이 그래서 양다 많이 김핑이 성장하다 군도 되발이나 양다 많이 우리 양은 시어 말해서 뭐가 무슨 군도 되발이 신체가 나와다 바로 잡혔어 알아 근데 뭐 가지고 와 군도 되발이 신체가 나와다 바로 잡혔어 나와다 바로 잡혔어 와 나와다 바로 그랬어 군도 되발이 신체가 나와다 바로 잡혔어 잡혔어 맞지 좋아 와 나와다 바로 잡혔어 이 소장 양다 많이 세는 거요 말해서
Yeah. So for Prasangika, conventional truth is necessarily it's necessarily not real conventionalities. So as it says here, there are no real conventionalities. This is because if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily not real. So it's necessarily not real. So necessarily not real, saying the reason is for Prasangika, as long as it is conventional truth, then it is necessarily, sorry, it necessarily doesn't exist. As long as it is a conventional truth, it doesn't establish as it appears. Prasangika, if it is a conventional truth, then it doesn't exist or it doesn't establish as it appears. So because of this reason, then they say, as long as it says here, if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily not real. So for Prasangika, they say it's not appropriate to divide conventional truths into two real conventionalities and unreal conventionalities. So there's no need to divide, or it's inappropriate to divide because there are no real conventionalities. Then you can see the reasoning goes like this. But this is because if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily not real. Again, then this is because if it is a conventionality, it is necessarily unreal. So, however, it is appropriate to divide conventional truths into two, real and unreal, relative to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So, it is appropriate to divide conventional truths into two, real and unreal, relative to or with regard to or with respect to the perspective of worldly consciousness, because a form is real with relative to the perspective of worldly consciousness, and the reflections of a face in the mirror is unreal relative to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So it's appropriate to divide conventional truths into two, right? Real and unreal with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. This is a very important, you must conjoin this you must conjoin this. So when it's appropriate to divide conventional truths into two, real and unreal, with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness, then the reason is because the form is real with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness, and the reflections of a face in the mirror is unreal with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness.
Oh, that's it.
So what does it mean by relative or with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness? So the meaning of this is for ordinary beings, or for beings who do not realize emptiness. So that is what you mean by with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So basically, it means for ordinary beings, or beings who have not realized emptiness. So the conventional truths can be divided into two, real and unreal.
That is Andua. When you teaching all of the Anda Sude, teaching all of the other in the Yoga Maris, so they do the teaching all of the Yanga de Yoga Maris, never to body Yomarwa. That's what the teaching all the other in the Yoga Maris, no more which is the Sud Demba to Sud Demba to body, teaching all of the other Yoga Maris.
If it is real relative to the perspective of worldly consciousness, it is not necessarily existence, because truly existent forms are real relative to the perspective of worldly consciousness, but do not exist. So if it is real, a real conventional truths or real conventionalities with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness, it is not necessarily existent, because truly existent forms for ordinary beings, they regard it as real. So, however, there is no truly existent forms. Truly existent forms do not exist.
Oh, that is. That was a bit disastrousous. The teaching was the teaching was the other areas. The Sudenunica, who the education was the other is. Sudenu education was the other is. Agitation was the other is a standard. That's how I was not. Agitation was the Geneva was only to what was so Joe. Only Mato was so Joe. Who did? Only Mato was so Joe, the Sudan, no other mother, but two reasons. Yes, no other Maduba. Do not the Maduba talk reverse. Yet those soon know the Maduba Toina. That's what they what? Do not the Maduba always do my. As soon as the Maduba, soon as it seems to be not. You too long it seems to be not a Maduba to reverse. Yes. Too long it seems to be not a Sudan at the door. That was a Tony Mato Sujo in my education was a Tony Mato Sujo Jaimba. Tony Mato Sujo Jaimba. That Tony Mato Sujo Sugi, so long it seems to be not a Mato reverse. So long it seems to be not a Mato. So long we know the Mato. Mato was that education was for young. Wow. Now the Mato was not what he channel over channel. But that Suji, Sujo, Suji, not. You know what I'm going to do? Oh, I know. What's you know what when it was so good money talking, yes. Wow. I am not going to do that.
So, na wata majuba, to your many to maris, niti su, rang is he, na wata majuba, niti to your matozang, matozang.
What do too much at another? Not simply know that. Soon now she can run 60 down. Sinchi di Kiapa Kadigina, Suna, Shingela, Suna,
Suna Chingela,
Suna Shingela. There are Suna, Shingela, what can you have done? What? I didn't wish you well. Tanjay de la Kanda, that jelly shake.
Suzuki, and the Suna Chingela, the Rangi Chingi to what they know your.
You might not actually work.
Yeah, so for Prasankhika Madhyamaka, they assert that for an ordinary beings, as long as a form appears, it appears to be established by way of its own character. This is for Prasankhika Madhyamaka. As for an ordinary beings, so as when an object appears, it appears to be established by way of its own character. So that's why when we say with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness, we refer, the worldly consciousness referred to an ordinary beings and beings who have not realized emptiness. So for an ordinary beings, it is real. For example, form. So form is real for an ordinary beings. In other words, with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. And truly existent form is also real with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So, why do we say that it is real with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness? Then, then one has to ask the question is, so does an ordinary being able to realize that form is not established as it appears or not? So does an ordinary being can realize, can an ordinary being realize a form does not exist as it appears? The answer is no. An ordinary beings cannot realize a form does not exist as it appears. So why? Because they haven't, or they do not realize that form doesn't exist as it appears, as established by way of its own character. So as I mentioned just now, for Prasangika Madhyamaka, for an ordinary beings, when an object appears, it appears to be established by way of its own character, right? So in ordinary beings cannot realize form do not exist or does not exist as it appears, because they do not realize that form does not exist as it appears. It appears as established by way of its own character, however, it doesn't exist as it appears. And ordinary beings cannot realize that. It's unable to realize that. Yeah, so similarly, a form doesn't exist. And ordinary beings cannot or is unable to realize a form doesn't exist as it appears. So similarly, an ordinary beings cannot realize a fully existent form doesn't exist as it appears. To talk about the difference of real and unreal with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness, so there are two. One is object, another one is object possessor. So first we talk about the object possessor. So they are correct object possessor and incorrect object possessor. Yeah, so real and unreal with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So it can be the word real and unreal can be used, and for object possessor or for subject, then the word correct and incorrect is used. So for object possessor, there is correct and incorrect object possessor. So the definitions for a correct object possessor is being a consciousness, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and not realize it as a wrong consciousness. 你老師數多唔明白咯？我明白，但係啲先我哋已經養到成年時啦。已經先我嘅養到未？先我啦，對，已經養到未成年啊？已經養到未成年啊？Yeah. So being a consciousness, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and not realized it as a wrong consciousness is the definitions of conventionality of a correct object possessor. Is the definitions is the definitions of a correct object possessor. That's essentially the shawai na. Essentially the shawai na. Pumpa deba tu banzi denzi. Pumpa deba tu banzi denzi. Na pumpa deba tu banzi denzi te not only for money, the jogi, hani bi chama de lo.
그 로히스도 두고 말해서 닌지 로히 그 닌지 로히스 또 봐이나 닌지 로히스 또 봐이나 이거 대박 그 닌지 로히스 또 봐이나 공부되는 되게 또 돈이 또
또나
또나 공부 대박 그 닌지 로히 이거 또 봐이나 또 가지고 되게 공부되는 돈이 또 닌지 로히 또 로히 또 닌지 때문에 이만 나시 때가 되면 신지로도 쉬바래 샤상 나 하고는 거라 내가 보는 게 있고 대박 그 진짜 뭐 대박 그 말에 뭐서 하고는 거라 야 하고는 내가 된지 로히 또 거라
기워디 엔디 공부된도
뭐 대박 그 된지 로히 또 두고 말이야 이거 봐이나 대박 그 된지 로히 또 드나 공부 대박 그 지바 그 신지로도 지는 뭐 대박 그 말에 뭐 사 하고디 공부되는 대박 뭐로 공부되는 돈이 또 들어와. 단단히 수고지고 돈이 또 막이 들어와. 돈이 또 들어와. 또 벤지들 옷이 또 우영. 벤지 옷이 또 봐이나. 벤지 옷 공부 대박 벤지 옷이 또 봐이나. 공부되는 돈이 또 공부되는 돈이 또.
So I've got to repeat the definitions for a correct object processor just now. So I repeat. So being a consciousness, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness cannot realize it as a wrong consciousness is the definitions of a correct processor. So to give illustrations, then these illustrations then will, you can fill these words to place the word ease. So a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness cannot realize the word, not realize it, right? So then, for example, yeah. So the true grasping, apprehending, aggregate as truly existent. I repeat, true grasping, that apprehends, aggregate as truly existent. So a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness cannot realize true grasping that apprehends, aggregates as truly existent as a wrong consciousness. So this is the illustration. So I repeat, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness cannot realize true grasping that apprehends, aggregate as truly existent as a wrong consciousness. So in order to realize this true grasping as a wrong consciousness, then that being, for example, an ordinary being, must realize emptiness on the basis of continuance.
돈이 또 먼저 가가지 타님이 지니 최로 히스 또 니바데 단지 대신 원도 이제 로비도 지니스로 이제 로비도 지니
So a conventional being a consciousness, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realize it as wrong consciousness is the definitions of a conventionality of an incorrect object processor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So just now the definitions for correct object processor. So then you have to add the word with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness at the end of the sentence. So is the definitions of a correct object processor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So I repeat, for the definitions of a correct object processor. So just now I still had is the definitions of an object processor, right? So you have to add the word with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So then the definitions of incorrect object processor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is being a consciousness, a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realize it as wrong consciousness is the definitions of an incorrect object possessor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness.
아들 진실하고 샤바이나 멜로나기 시기 눈에 시기를 지기 이시 요라 이 간디 그래 멜로나기 시기 눈에 시기를 지기 시기를 지기 이시 요라 오 눈에 시기를 지기 되게 미시디 나간다 보니 또 많이 아가 세는 때로 했어 그래서 와 그래서 또 와서다 하나 이제 신호들 와
유진 양답의 군속 기체이나 내 군속 시기 기체모 요나이라 양 유메이나 디기요나 유진 양답의 체이 양 디기로 이지미지의 체이 군속 통으로. So in the illustration for incorrect object possessor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is an ordinary beings can realize the mind consciousness that apprehends the reflections of a face in a mirror as a wrong consciousness. So an ordinary beings, because when we say because we say that an incorrect object possessor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional recognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realize it as wrong consciousness, right? So the illustration for this is an eye consciousness that apprehends the reflections of a face in the mirror as a face is a wrong consciousness. So an ordinary being can realize that. So this is the illustration for incorrect object possessor with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness.
다 손바데 이리와 나가다 유지 근소들아 다 이거들은 맞아 유지 근소 내가 간다지 샤고래 와 우리 또 뭐니 그 간다지 타니비 재미 나와다 많이 바데 다 디킹 올때 위한다 그치 와 유지 근소 가니 돈이 또 많이 간다지 타니비 재미 나와다 마두가 또 많이 바데 지금 디킹 올때 위한다 그치 이제
Yeah. So then the next one is with regard to the object. So just now was talking about the correct object possessor and incorrect object possessor, right? We talk about the definition and we talk about the illustration of it as well. So next we are going to talk about the real object and real object. So as I mentioned just now, the word in Tibetan, Yangda and Lokpa, then in relation to object possessor, English word correct and incorrect are used, and in relation to object, then real and unreal are used. So these words are used. So next we talk about object, right? So the definitions of a real object with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness, cannot realize that it doesn't exist as it appears. I repeat, the definitions of a real object with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness, cannot realize that it doesn't exist as it appears.
앞에 그 진실 시험이나 와 유지 근거가 돈이 또 많이 받아지 탄 지금 최나와다 마비가 또 못하는 거라 또 많이 봐샤오데 아무도 수다고 샤는 수대 뭔가 돈이 또 많이 받아지 탄이 재미기 수기 나와다 마비가 또 동요 이 나와다 마비가 또 생각 돈이 또 같아 이슈장이 봐 수기 나와다 마비가 뭐데 아 유양다도 그거 유양다도 되게 잘 수기 와
So now what I'm about to go, so we tend to So the definitions of a real object with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional valid cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and not realized that it doesn't exist as it appears, right? So to give an illustration for this is a conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and not realized that form is the illustration. So cannot realize that form doesn't exist as it appears. So as I mentioned just now, in order to realize that form doesn't exist as it appears, right? Then one must realize the emptiness on the basis of form. So since it is a conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness, so he cannot realize that form doesn't exist as it appears. So after we talk about the correct object, definitions of a real object. Next, we talk about the definitions of an unreal object. So the definitions of an unreal object with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realized that doesn't exist as it appears. So the previous one was cannot. And the next one, which is definitions of an unreal object, and the word is can. So who has never realized emptiness and realized that it doesn't exist as it appears. So I'll repeat. The definitions of an unreal object with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness is a conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realized that it doesn't exist as it appears. So the illustration for this is a conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realized that the reflections of a face in a mirror doesn't exist as a face. So even though the reflections of a face in a mirror appears to be a face, right? But conventional value cognizer in the continuum of a person who has never realized emptiness and realized that the reflections of a face in a mirror doesn't exist as a face.
Oh, that is the issue that you know people do.
So in general, in Prasangika system, conventional truths it is inappropriate to divide conventional truths into real conventionalities and unreal conventionalities. However, it is appropriate to divide conventional truths into real and unreal with regard to the perspective of worldly consciousness. So as I mentioned just now, then for object possessor, then there are correct and incorrect. And then for object, they are real and unreal. So these divisions into real and unreal or incorrect and correct is with respect to the perspective of holy consciousness.
That is study the knowledge here. That is you do what? Study more than that is what that matter is in the yeah. That is Mamu's Roya.
Oh, Gina Jema de Sungina.
But the Chinawan, that could not be much here.
Yeah, so actually, in order to talk about this, we need to talk about superficial cause of mistake as well. However, maybe if next class we have time, then I would talk about superficial cause of mistake, and otherwise, then it will create confusion. So I don't want to confuse you. So in this class, I'm not going to talk about superficial cause of mistake, and I would like to talk about the etymology. Etymology, 이 자식 가리 자식이
군도 되면 안 보러.
군도 대박이
자식 되면 심시해 봐. 군도 되면 자식 와. 나 공부한다고 지나. 군도 되면 와. 군도 되면 이제 군도 신경 가서 너 군도 봐. 또 민지 지금 뭐 때문에 그러지 그래서 너 군도 봐. 너 군도 봐서 또 민지가 잡아. 군도 봐서 공부 때문에 제가 군도 되면 시집이 중세 여대. 또 군도 봐. 또 민지 지금 뭐라. Maybe that you are yes. Wow. So, Kunzoba, who didn't you want to? Instead of the Koran, one of the Takal Deagamara, Takal Debakamarua, who did the Koran, one of the Deba is a Koran, one of the Debakamato. Then you been into the Demamarua. Put the Deba no other Madu race, and the different. Deba was no other Madu race over what? Both. Over the Kanda, who didn't you want to?
Yeah. So to talk about the etymology of a conventional truth from the object's side, then, for example, so a pot, and there is a reason to call pot a conventional truth because it is true for an obscure awareness, which is an ignorant true grasping. I repeat. Etymology etymology of conventional truth can be proceeded from the object side and can be proceeded from the object possessor side as well. So to talk about the first one, the etymology of a conventional truth from the object side. Then the first one is pot. There is a reason to call it a conventional truth because it is true for an obscure awareness, which is an ignorant true grasping. So for an ignorant true grasping, it will only grasp as fully as instant. So there is a reason to call it a conventional truth because it is true for an obscure awareness, which is an ignorant true grasping. So for an ignorant true grasping, it is true.
That was 그 공부 대버 두고 된지 된지들아 그렇죠 그렇게 막 집이 된지야 된지들아 공부 대버 시집이 된 대버 시집이 된지 가려서 내루지 대모습 통하나 스타 내루지 대모습 통하면 와 내루지 대모습 통하나 이제 이게 와 된지들 내가 공부 대버 시집이 된지들 공부 대버 와 그것도 말이야 그렇죠 공부 대버 집이 된지 제 받아 내루지 대모습 통하나 비시고
An etymology of a conventional truth to be posited from the object possessor side. For example, true grasping. So true grasping is a conventional truth because it obscures seeing directly the nature of reality. So the nature of reality also refers to emptiness. So I repeat, the etymology of a conventional truth from the object possessor side can be posited like this. True grasping. So true grasping is a conventional truth because it obscures seeing directly the nature of reality. The nature of reality also refers to emptiness. So to talk about the etymology of conventional truth, so to talk about words of conventional truth in Tibetan, so conventional truth in Tibetan is called Kun Tok Den Ba. So Kun Tok Den Ba. So there are three parts. So Kun is a plural word. So basically it means numerous, many, such as form and sound. And so has the meaning of false, true and false. It has the meaning of false. And truth means that it is true for true grasping. It is true for true grasping. So this is the etymological explanations of conventional truth in Tibetan is kun tok den ba. So kun, as I mentioned just now, it means many, various, such as form and sound. And then tok has the meaning of false, right? So false as in it doesn't exist as it appears. So it's false. It doesn't exist as it appears. And truth means that it is true for true grasping, right? So however, in general, it's not true. So however, in general even though in general is not true, so however, it is true for a true grasping.
that was a good demo. I hear that good demo. You are sent the card and guy. He said, you are sent the card and guy. They got the bar to do that. That you know, knowledge. They are not taking of this. What did
So the definitions of something's being an ultimate truth is an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate, and with respect to which a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate becomes a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate. The divisions of ultimate truths are like those in the context of Madhyamaka, subtle selflessness of persons and subtle selflessness of phenomena. In this context, it is asserted that true assertions are necessarily ultimate truths.
That under the was that under Tombani. That Tony. Or that was a Tony, which is similar. And that the man losing the top. The that Naja Ishi. Ishi, or the Demato with that Ishi to land the river. Only goes to Ishi. The social libre. Only to Ishi. That there was only goes to be hitting in the only goes to be hitting in the Tatu is Semas in the Kanda. That they were told without Kanda could look about dishes at Roa, dishes at it, that they would conduct churches at Roa. Not on the tender debody, and that they were the Kanda, Temakuarwa. Only that was the Tonys or the football that Kanda, the church can't be getting on the Deva Tumor to Tibetan. 这把就得点把里面把东西，这把点把里面把东西，现在可能大家呢，这个地情况很多，我这个什么，我的这可能呢点把什么的，这把今年你点把没东西，是吧？没把东西地里，那今年就来好了，今年的呢，这把地多完了，是吧？是不是那的这把地了多完是？
An object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate, and with respect to which a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate becomes a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate. This is the definitions of an ultimate truth, right? So ultimate truth, and emptiness are mutually inclusive. Ultimate truth and emptiness are mutually inclusive. So an example for a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate can be because exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise that directly realizes emptiness. And exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise that directly realizes emptiness. So this can be a valid cognizer distinguishing ultimate. So an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate, which is, for example, an aggregate or a person or phenomena. So they check or they analyze whether a person, an aggregate or all phenomena truly established or not, or truly existent or not. And then when when it realized that it doesn't exist when it realized that it is not truly existence, so that valid cognizer is a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate. Yeah. So they check whether then there is an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate. So a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate basically is to check or analyze whether phenomena such as a person or an aggregate truly established or truly existent or not. So when a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate realize that a person, for example, is not truly existent, then that becomes an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing an ultimate. So in other words, is a valid cognizer realize that object.
当然是比较细致嘛，细节为呢，我们群里的话，我们群里的我们群里是我们点多年的我在行的，是吧？
我们群
里是，
我们动漫里，
我多年的我，那我们群里去的，那等到点嘛，就这个是啊，哎呀，也是都群里的啊，不要点不要这个也是好的，这个是送人的哇，我们群里的，我们群里等到点嘛的哇。 그래서 내가 정말 그래서 가리거를 스타트하기 쉬우로와 그래서 근데 우리 친구들 그냥 아니세 아빠야 이 대바야 이 제발을 딱 달라고 하지 싶어 디 다시로 그냥 아니다 진짜 이 분도 되면 치소해 그냥 아니 정말 이 대바야 이 제발 했어
这样特别最近的一个Yeah. So next we talk about the etymology of an ultimate truth. So the etymology of an ultimate truth is, So the reality of a pot, the reality of a pot or the nature of phenomena of it is an ultimate truth. Yeah, because it is an object, it is ultimate, and it is true. It is true. So this like the conventional truth in Tibetan is Kun Zop Denpa, right? So we talk about the etymology of Kun Zop and Denpa. So similarly, ultimate truth in Tibetan is called Nam Denpa. So Nam Denpa. So the nature of phenomena or reality of a truth, then it is an ultimate truth because it is an object, it is ultimate, and it is a truth.
我们群里的这样一点这个现在我们群里的这样也是吧，这样一这个他跟那些人那个那些做啥这个的话，他跟那些人那个也是他们这样一点是。
So the reality of a thought or the nature of phenomena of a thought is an object because it is an object found by an exalted wisdom of highest exalted wisdom of meditative viewpoints. So the reality or nature of phenomena of a thought is an object because it is an object found by an highest exalted wisdom of meditative viewpoints. In other words of saying this is and highest sort of wisdom of meditative viewpoints realize it. And it is ultimate or it is highest because it is the highest modes of abiding. It is the ultimate modes of abiding. Therefore, the nature of reality of thoughts is ultimate. Yeah, it is ultimate because it is the ultimate or highest modes of abiding.
That temper is that temper was that good temper in temper of Hasha with that direction of the Siji Baina. Temper in the not the nation kingdom lawyers. Not the nation kingdom lawyers or the we trinity, but we know that she did. No one she we know that it's more than no one she argue this. But no one opinions. No one she you are that the lawyers. No one she are years. Other you are that can you are the lawyers. We did it. Not the nation can do this. No one knows it. You be near to the harvest. Nature, not the nature to nature. No one knows you be near to the harvest. The harvest was not the Blue was the junior, but we are the
And the reality of a thought or the nature of phenomena of a thought is a truth. So because it is incontrovertible in that it is incontrovertible that its modes of appearing and its modes of abiding are in accord. I repeat, the reality of a thought is a truth because it is incontrovertible that its modes of abiding and modes of appearing are in accord. So, for example, the reality of a thought for an highest exalted wisdom of meditative voice, it exists as it appears. The reality of a thought. So it exists as it appears for an highest exalted wisdom of meditative voice. So another way of saying this is it appears that the reality of exists in reality.
That then that but the demand is not to do this here. The German was about you, it's the machine, no you. But when you have to eat the kids would over that, you know, you think, what? Getting on about you in this one way.
Yeah, so next class, I'm going to talk about modes of asserting object possessors, which is asserted by Prasangika, which is quite weird. So next class, we're going to talk about it, the mode of asserting object possessors. So sorry that we do not have time for question and answer today, so I will stop here. So we dedicate these roots of virtue, especially accumulated through these Dharma lessons, may be the complete cause for Buddha Dharma to glory, and for all sentient beings to experience happiness, and may be the complete cause for all upholders of Buddha's teaching, for all upholders of Buddha's teachings to live long, good health, and all their holy wishes and enlightened activities spread in all 10 directions and accomplish instantaneously. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue to our beloved teacher, Gyaltsen, So may the holy wishes of Rinpoche be instantaneously fulfilled, and may the unmistaken reincarnations of Rinpoche be strictly returned and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for the sake of teachings and sentient beings, so that we will have the opportunity to receive the precious teaching from you again, Rinpoche. We also dedicate this root of virtue to the world peace, and may external happiness prevail in the world.